another episode of Fermented Fiction. On this podcast, we drink beer, roll dice, and debate the best films, books, and shows in the genre fiction realm with our distinguished guests. This show is hosted by Travis Vermeulen, Colin Poynton, Jeremy Hudson, and me, Clay Vermeulen. Fair warning now, we spoil everything we debate here, so if you haven't seen the featured work, you might consider leaving, checking it out, and coming back when you've been able to form your own opinion. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and otherwise spread the word, as we are an indie-produced venture. Thank you so much for being here, and we hope you enjoy the show. Hello, Fermented folks! Thanks for tuning in to another featured Author of the Month interview. The last one, or no. This is going to be the first one of next season, actually. So, thanks for tuning in to another featured Author of the Month interview. First one of the season. We're kicking it off this year with James L. Sutter, author of many things, musician, game creator, and most recently, YA author. So, James, thank you so much for coming on the show. We are stoked to have you here. All big fans all the way around, Pathfinder players here. So, it's great to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So let's start with your book, because that's kind of a new avenue for you. You said you've been doing games for a couple decades, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I got into the game industry when I was 20. I actually started working at Paizo before I was old enough to even go to the bar with everybody.
I was going to say, you don't look very old for how many things are in your archive, man. It's pretty impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm 39. I've like I said, I got started early. I was really lucky. I graduated college at 20 because of this cool program they have in Washington called Running Start, where you can essentially get 2 years of college for free while you're in high school. So I was like, yes, I will do that. I am done with high school. So I got out of college and immediately started working in the game industry, and just I like to keep busy on a lot of different projects, so it was always novels or comics or game work. And I have a tendency to bounce around a lot. I find it really refreshing to jump to new genres, which is why I now have this shift. I've been working in science fiction and fantasy and games for almost 20 years. And now suddenly I'm writing young adult contemporary romance because it just was what felt good during the pandemic. And Dark Hearts comes out June 6th. So everything is getting real close.
Right, and you've got a launch party down at Third Place Books?
Third Place Books, in Seattle. So that'll be fun if anybody's in Seattle and wants to come by. It's my neighborhood bookstore, so I think it'll be
a great bookstore.
So you've been. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
I didn't realize you guys were local.
Oh, yeah, yep. We are. Colin's kind of in Linwood area. I'm in Everett. Travis is not. He's
my God. Okay, awesome.
It's all the way in
I'm a Montana resident, so not too far away. Just straight away.
Far enough, but so that's the big thing. That, and actually the new Starfinder comic series that I'm writing, both release in June. So it's been good, but it's been hectic.
No kidding. And are you still playing music? I saw you had an album in 2020.
I mean, yes and no. Like, the pandemic really put a damper on things. But when I was younger, I was in bands kind of seriously, trying to make a go of it all through my teens and early 20s, either, punk and hardcore or like progressive metalcore, all that kind of stuff. And then now, at 39, I still love playing in bands, but it's a lot harder to really go after it seriously when everybody's like, all right, so we can practice from between the first kid's nap time and the second kid's nap time. There's nothing more metal than juggling, baby schedules. But I still play, I do solo releases. Like, I do have some solo music on my website. Before the pandemic, I was actually playing in the band for a Star Wars theater troupe, where every summer, all August, they would, twice a weekend perform the entirety of a Star Wars movie, just like low budget in the park. So like R2-D2 would be a girl on roller skates with a slide whistle, you know? And then I was in the band, you know, playing guitar, doing the soundtrack for it. And it was just super fun. So yeah, I'll play anything, man. My big thing right now that I was really happy about is Macmillan Audio picked up the audiobook for Dark Hearts, and they let me write the intro and outro music for it, which was something that had been kind of a bucket list item. You know, I'd always thought like, you know, one day if I sell a book, I would like to write that, you know, because why not? They got to get it from somebody. So
that's amazing, man. You're probably one of very few authors who can say that, actually. I doubt there's many. I don't think there's a lot of people that do it. I don't know if maybe I'm just the only guy who asks. Like, I feel like so much of my career has been the result of just showing up and being like, hey, can I do that? Like, you know, and people go, oh, I guess so. You know, I mean, that's how I got into the game.
You don't have to pay someone else.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I got into the game industry was I literally, you know, cold emailed the CEO of Paizo because they had Amazing Stories magazine at the time and they were hiring for an editor-in-chief. And I emailed and said, hey, I am totally unqualified for that position, but here's what I can do. Do you have anything for me? And they brought me in. Like, my first job was finding images for their web store at a nickel a JPEG. So like the bottomest of the barrel. But then I was in and I worked my way up through internships and customer service and stuff until I was working on Dungeon and Dragon magazines. And then we, you know, made Pathfinder and then eventually Starfinder. And so I've done a lot of different things in the industry. I've been an editor and a developer, and, you know, I was the editor in charge of the novel line for kind of its entire the entire Pathfinder novel line's life, which was like 40 books, something like that. And then I was the creative director starting Starfinder. So
yeah, that's a hell of a track record, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah, like I said, my wife makes fun of me because I'm a little bit of a compulsive, like, not exactly a ladder climber, but I just like to do stuff. And whenever I see something that looks fun, I'm like, well, maybe I could try. Like, maybe that would work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I imagine each ladder gets a little less greasy the more ladders you've climbed, right? It's
true, but it's also funny how sometimes you think something will transfer over and it doesn't. Like when I made the switch from, you know, so before Dark Hearts, I had written two Pathfinder novels, so adult science fiction fantasy that had done fine. And, you know, and I had been working in science and fiction fantasy, you know, as an editor for a long time and as a game designer. And so I sort of thought it would be easy to step sideways into another form of novel writing. And it turns out, I mean, it probably helped me some because it definitely gave me connections and let me, you know, have a lot of people to ask, and it had given me a ton of experience. But kind of the young adult romance world doesn't really care about, you know, games or whatever. And so I was very surprised to find that, you know, the people who had hired, you know, who had bought the book were kind of like, oh, what's Pathfinder? What's Starfinder? And I'm like, oh, okay. So that's really, I was just kind of starting at the bottom again in a new genre. But that's just kind of how I work. I love to jump between things.
I'm curious. I can see clearly in like the even just the book synopsis of Dark Hearts that it seems like you've woven in some of that like punk rock metal like background.
Yeah.
How did that weave together with your like experience with sci-fi fantasy writing? Did they work together in collaboration to create the story, or one was dominant?
Honestly, it was kind of a vacation from it. Like Dark Hearts is much more tied to just my own life. You know, we've been talking about music. So Dark Hearts, the basic pitch for folks is it's a young adult romance, queer romance about falling in love with the boy who stole your chance at being a rock star. So it's all about, you know, the main character formed a band with his friends when he was in middle school. Then egos got big. He stormed out. And then they got huge without him. So now they're all famous and he's stuck, you know, just trying not to fail social studies, right? So he's 17 and super bitter about it. And then comes back into contact with the lead singer. They fall for each other. And in the midst of this secret romance, he starts thinking that maybe this is his chance to get back into fame and fortune and, you know, all the opportunities he missed. And so for me, the book was really dealing a lot with my own feelings around that as a teenager, because, you know, I started my first punk band when I was 15, and like we did okay. Like we played a lot of local shows and, you know, got on the radio a couple of times. But I can remember being 18, 19 and looking at bands younger than me starting to get signed and blow up and thinking, oh, well, I've missed my shot. You know, like if I'm not famous by the time I'm 18, I guess I'm a has-been. You know, I'm all washed up. And like, you know, now I can look back and kind of laugh at that. But at the time, it really felt like that. And I think a lot of kids are carrying that around. If you're not, you know, the sports star you thought you'd be, or the theater, you know, the child actor or whatever. And so the book was really just connecting with both my roots as an underage musician in Seattle and also that feeling of, what now? You know, like I'm not who I thought I was. And of course that also ties in nicely with, it is sort of a coming out story as well, and deals with my own experiences as, you know, a queer dude in Seattle that took a long time to figure his shit out. And so like being able to put that into the book as well was really fun. So it's a lot about my life. There are some, you know, Dungeons and Dragons jokes woven in there, but for the most part, it really was just kind of a vacation from that for me.
I think that's a really cool theme of the like thinking that you have to catch that fame right away. Because I might be wrong on this, but I've thought about it a lot. Of like it seems even more prominent today with social media of being able to see people your same age who have succeeded on a constant basis on your social media feeds. Like that kind of feeling seems even more weighted. So to have a story in that is really cool.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, and it's so weird because we prioritize youth so much, and especially in music, it's weird because music is, I get it if you're a gymnast or whatever, but in music, people generally just get better as they get older. You know, like the metal band that's been doing it for 30 years is going to destroy you compared to, you know, the 18-year-olds. But because, and I think a lot of it is because touring is so hard. Like you can't really have an adult life while also being on tour unless you get very successful very quickly. And so everybody is getting signed out of high school or out of college because that's when they have no connections and no responsibilities and can go live on the road, you know, and live in a van and eat taco time for 9 months at a time, you know? And so I think as a result, music skews so young that, yeah, it's easy to feel like you've already missed the boat. I mean, I still often feel like I missed the boat, even though I got to transition into another industry. And funnily enough, I didn't write my first novel until the band that was most serious that I was in broke up, because I had been, you know, when you're practicing 3 nights a week and then you're playing shows on the weekend, suddenly, you know, when that band ended, I had all this free time and I needed something to fill that hole in my, you know, creative life. And so that's when I started writing Death's Heretic, my first novel. And that turned into a much more sustainable creative life, because now I still get to, you know, have some of that same experience, but I get to stay at home and have, you know, friends that I'm around all the time, and a wife and a house and, you know, a job, all those things.
Yeah. Is that, because to me, like being in a band, you're always with other people, you know, practicing and doing your jam sessions and stuff. Whereas with writing, it's very much like you and the laptop.
It's so solitary. Yeah. Which is weird.
So it's interesting that you found that there's actually a lot of similarity, and I'm curious about that.
Oh, there is. I mean, I'm a very social person. Actually, so I left Paizo. I stepped down from the creative director role like 5 years ago to write full time. And I really, I enjoy it, but I do miss that collaborative element of working with people all the time. And so, you know, I love being in a band. Being in a band is the best and the worst, right? Like when it's going well and when you really like all the guys you're playing with, there's nothing better. But when stuff goes wrong, man, it's like a bad marriage or something. You know, it gets real poisonous real quick. But so, yeah, I wish the writer life were a little more social, but I love being able to just come up with stuff, just to write stuff out of my brain. And it doesn't, weirdly, I actually think I still like writing music more, because I can get more easily into that flow state. But writing is a thing that I enjoy and that I've somehow stumbled into a career with. And so I'm happy to have that be the main thing.
Yeah, the writing flow state takes a long time for me to get into, but once you get in there, it feels awesome.
Yeah.
I was going to ask so is the gaming world kind of in between those two worlds? How collaborative is it to create a Pathfinder?
It's very collaborative, right? And so like with both Pathfinder and Starfinder, you know, I'm a co-creator. I was one of Pathfinder. You know, there were a bunch of people working on it, but there were probably 7 or 8. If you include the art team, there were maybe 10 of us working on it in the beginning, sort of creating that setting. And then Starfinder was really, you know, an all hands on deck thing. But as the creative director, I led sort of like a small dedicated Starfinder team. But then we were also bringing in everybody from, you know, designers to work on, you know, the mechanics to, you know, developers to editors to even like the customer service team saved our ass a whole bunch with playtesting stuff to tell us like, okay, but do normal people like this, you know? And I mean, we rewrote the entire like stats attribute system of Starfinder like a week before it went to print because one of the developers on my team, Amanda Hammond, was like, I think we need to run this by customer service one more time, and came back and was like, they hate it. Yeah. And so we really had to just like trash it all and like start over at the last minute, and it all worked out, thank God. But yeah, it was 100% all hands on deck for that one. And you know, it's like I say, it's the best and the worst because you are constantly working with these creative people, many of whom are objective geniuses, but if you've ever worked with creative geniuses, getting a bunch of them in a room and making them fight is like not always the most fun. And so as creative director, you know, one of my roles was really trying to bring out the best in people while also keeping them from slitting each other's throats. And you know, it was a lot of fun. Like when it was really flowing and you could just bounce off other people's ideas. Like it's almost like being in an improv group. Somebody will throw something out and then you're like, yes, and what if that dragon blah, blah, blah. And what if the dragons, instead of riding the dragons, now they fly starships together and like the dragon's the gunner and like, you know, whatever. It's really fun to be in that collaborative relationship. But the other side of that that's really hard for a lot of people is that you don't have ownership when you work for a company. You don't have ownership over the process. And like, maybe that means that, you know, you're working on a team and so you have to compromise. But sometimes it also means like, for instance, I don't own any of Starfinder or Pathfinder or even like the novels that I wrote for them. Like I don't own that work. Like that's all belongs to Paizo, the company. And so I can't, you know, take my toys and go home because they're not my toys, right? And so I think that's the sort of thing that can be really hard for people if they don't realize what they're getting into. And that's one of the reasons why I do so many other things. Like, and I think it made it a lot easier for me to work for a game company and to have, you know, everything I create during the day is owned by somebody else. I was able to take pride in that, but I was able to divorce myself a little bit from it because I knew that I had either a band on the side that was just mine or a novel that I was writing or short stories or whatever. Having those side projects allowed me to take a step back. Whereas I'd seen a lot of people who poured all their energy into their day job at a game company. And then when something doesn't go their way, or God forbid, when they leave, and they feel like they have nothing. And so for me, it was always really important to be able to have those other projects so that I could say when something didn't go my way in a creative meeting, I could go, okay, cool. Like that's the job. And I think that makes for a better employment experience. That said, I love the fact that now, you know, working on Dark Hearts and stuff, that's just mine. Like I get to, you know, obviously I'm working with an editor and an agent and everybody has, you know, stuff they're bringing to the table. But at the end of the day, I own that. And if it gets successful, I get to be successful too. So that's really nice.
Yeah. So you just went straight indie with that?
Well, I mean, no, I'm with a Big Five publisher. So I'm with... Oh,
you are? Okay.
Yeah. I'm with Wednesday, which is a division of Macmillan. And that's been really nice. But I still, even though I've sold them the rights to publish the book, I still own it. So, you know, I get royalties. I get every time we sell a translation or film rights or whatever, like I get paid again.
When
and
the movie, you'll get paid.
Yeah, exactly. Like fingers crossed. But it's been amazing so far. I think the book isn't out yet, but in addition to English all over the world, I think we're also at 6 or 7 translations into other languages. So it's going to be in, Russian and Portuguese and Czech and a bunch of other languages. So that's been really fun.
Wow. Congratulations. That's really good news. Man. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's a whole different experience, but it's been really pleasant.
I have a question for you that I've asked other authors on the show, because I'm just curious at the differing answers. But
yeah,
when I was reading the synopsis, Red, White, and Royal Blue popped up as a similar title, and I've read that, enjoyed it. It was
it's so good
fun romance story, and I'm just curious what you think as a writer when a similar title kind of gets attached to the sales pitch of your book. Is that a weird feeling or a good one?
I mean, it's both. It's something that, I always worry about a little bit, because there's always the concern of like, if you tell people it's just like X and then it's not just like X, they might be disappointed. Whereas if they went in with no preconceptions, like, I'm also somebody who, I never watch trailers for movies. If somebody says it's good, I'll go see it because I don't want to know anything. I want to have that sort of like surprise experience. But I think it is really useful, and it starts very early in the process, actually. Like when I was pitching the book to, the guy who would become my agent, when we were trying to sell it to publishers, we found those comp titles, a couple of books, and said, this is like Red, White, and Royal Blue, because it's just a very quick and easy way for people to get a sense of what they're dealing with. And in this case, actually, I had listened to Red, White, and Royal Blue and loved it. And it was one of the books that made me want to write something like this. So when people were saying, oh, that's a good comp title, I went, great. And actually, we even, for the audiobook, when they were asking me about narrators, there was saying sort of like, what style do you want? And I was saying, well, really, I loved the audiobook of Red, White, and Royal Blue. So if we could find somebody who, narrates like Ramon de Ocampo, who did that book, that would be great. And they came back and said, oh, well, do you want us to just get him? He's like, yes, that would be great. So he wrote the book, and I was like, oh, this was literally the person's voice that I was hearing in my head while I was writing the dialogue. Like, that's perfect. Nice. And so I got very lucky there. And that's when I said the whole process, has been so lovely, like getting to have so much input, really a surprising amount of input. Because, for instance, I know a lot of authors who the publisher's just like, here's your cover, and it's done. And for us, there was a lot of back and forth, because I had fairly strong feelings of, it's a romance novel, but also it's about sort of like a goth rock band. And so I would love to have some of that sort of rock and roll feel to the cover, which I knew was sort of asking a lot for the genre, but they really worked with me. And the final cover we got is just amazing. Like, I'm so happy with it. It has it's almost like a Duran Duran album cover or something. Like, I don't know. It's it's got sort of an 80s vibe, and I really like it.
It's badass.
Yeah. So I feel like I've been really fortunate with my publisher.
We interviewed Travis Baldry. Legends of Lattes was his book, his NaNoWriMo, and he self-published and then got picked up by Tor. And what's funny is that he basically wrote that book because of the pandemic and because he wanted to fill some time, and also because he always does audiobooks for lit RPGs, and he was like, I'm gonna write what I want to read, which is a cozy fantasy.
Totally.
Literally why he wrote it, so he could read what he wanted.
Very impressive. Like the number of careers that guy has successfully had, I'm like, oh, respect. Like, that's he's also right. He went from games to narration to author or whatever. It's like, oh,
yeah, he was like the game. He was the primary game designer, executive lead for what was the Diablo style game that was in about 2000.
It's like Torchlight or something like that.
Yeah, Torchlight.
Yeah,
Torchlight 1 and 2.
But, yeah, I've never met him, but it's one of those people where it's like, oh, we might actually have a lot in common. He seems cool.
Well, yeah, we also interviewed Spencer Ellsworth.
Recently. I know Spencer.
And Spencer, and he also plays prog rock, and he did has had a band for a while, and he just recommended in our interview that we listen to one of his basically a series of songs related to his sci-fi trilogy, which is of novellas. And I was like, oh man, I wish I had known that prior. I would have listened to it prior to our interview if I had known about it.
No, that's awesome.
So you've got a new Starfinder line coming out too. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah. So they tapped me to write the new Starfinder comic. It's called Angels of the Drift, and it's this story arc is 5 issues. We'll see. I hope it goes beyond that, but we'll find out, I guess. And that launches the first of the monthly floppies comes out in June, but you can actually back a Kickstarter right now to get the whole hardcover collection when it comes out. So either way, whether you like pull lists from your local comic book store, or whether you just want to get it all and be done. But yes, that was a really fun one. I had written for the Pathfinder comics in the past and really enjoyed that. So when they tapped me to be like, hey, well, you've written Pathfinder comics and you were the creative director on Starfinder, seemed like a good match, and so I was very glad to be brought in, and they had some ideas for what they wanted the story to be, but it's basically it's the iconic characters, or a subset of the iconic characters, who are all a starship crew who get contacted by this sort of robot angel alien whose whole mission is to bring hyperspace technology to a previously uncontacted world. And so they're helping out with that. But of course, an uncontacted world with an advanced civilization is ripe for exploitation. So they're not the only ones trying to get there. So it's kind of a race against evil forces. And it's super fun because Starfinder, I guess for anybody listening who doesn't know, Starfinder is the science fantasy role-playing game. It's kind of, you can think Star Wars, Alien, Star Trek, like all your favorite science fiction and fantasy tropes can sort of like fit in there, sort of like, or like a Warhammer 40K, etc. And it was super fun to return to that universe and to these characters that I had spent a lot of time working on, because you've got the party is, you've got the de facto captain, who's Navasi, who's the human character, who's sort of a Han Solo, fast-talking, like ex-pirate sort of scoundrel kind of character, the scoundrel with a heart of gold. And then you've got our big Vesk, who's like sort of a reptilian warrior named Obadiah. You've got a ratfolk mechanic named Quig. You've got a sort of bug person who is the medic and also a priest of the death goddess. So he'll patch you up, but if you die, that's fine too.
Win-win.
Yeah, and then we've got an elven precog, Ciravel, who's gets to like catch glimpses of the future and manipulate time. And so it's a really fun party, and I loved getting to come back to these characters that I'd been so deeply invested in when we were creating them, and then I've been away for 5 years. So to come back was kind of like hanging out with old college buddies, where you're like, "Hey, it's you!" Yeah.
I was going to ask
when you're working for an RP like that, or an IP, I should say.
Yeah.
How much control of the storyline do you have as the writer versus what
depends on the IP
producers say? This is what you're doing.
Depends on the IP that you're working for, right? I've got friends who've written for Star Wars, and that is just draconian all the way down, right? But then there's other IPs, like in this case, because I had been so deeply invested with Starfinder and just the company in general, like they knew me, they trusted me, and so they were willing to kind of give me the specs for what they wanted out of the project, and then just be like, go. And I had a lot of opportunity. I still had to go through the process of taking what they want, come up with a pitch, get that pitch greenlit, then expand it into an outline for each issue, get that greenlit. But once that happened, they really were eager to let me just tell what I wanted to tell with the stories and the character arcs. And, had I been brand new to the system, there probably would have been a lot more back and forth, because it's their job as the manager of the IP. And like, it used to be my job too, so I get it. It's very important to keep the brand consistent, to make sure that the characters don't do anything out of character for them. But in this case, I had, sort of the cheat code where I knew these characters so intimately that there sort of wasn't even really an opportunity for that to go awry, because I knew in my gut, like, well, Quig would never say that. Well, Keskadai would never do that, you know? And so I had an advantage that an outside writer probably wouldn't have had. So yeah, I had a lot of creative freedom on it, but yeah, it always goes back and forth. Sometimes you never have total creative freedom when you're working for an IP, because somebody always owns it. Even when I was the creative director, you know, people think creative director means you get to make all the decisions. And actually, part of being a good creative director is making as few decisions as yourself as possible, by which I mean, you know, you've got the requirements coming from the top. You know, whoever owns the company is going to have some basic ideas of what they want out of you and your game. But also the people beneath you, your job as the creative director is to bring out their best ideas and make sure that they, you know, shine as brightly as they can. And so you always want to be saying yes as often as possible, so that when you do have to say, no, I don't think that works for this game, you know, people don't feel like shut down. They just know, okay, well, yeah, that didn't work. Let's try something different. You know, because you want some people feel like they just want to have total control over a game, and that's fine if you're a one-person shop. If it's just your personal thing, sure, have complete creative control. But if you're going to have a team, why have a team unless you're going to let them bring everything they can to the table? You know, so that's always been my philosophy on creative direction, and I think it resulted in a really good game.
So going back to the talking about having the characters in the world already very well fleshed out.
Yeah.
How did it present a unique challenge to you to write like Dark Hearts, where you had to create everything from scratch? I mean, I know it's very much based on your life and stuff.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
You know, what's the difference between writing those Starfinder characters to your Dark Heart characters?
You know, I use a very similar process with both of them, where I really, as I'm planning out the book or the comic, I try to chart out everybody's character arcs so that I know sort of where they start at the beginning of the book, and then who they change into by the end of the book. And I try to make sure I've got it really plotted out sort of beat by beat. How do they go from emotional place X to emotional place Y? And I've found that being sort of mathematical about it like that has really helped with the outlining process, because then I always know, you know, what needs to happen in a given scene. Well, so-and-so needs to be having this sort of internal revelation, and that will inform what's happening, even if what's happening is, you know, they're being shot at by a dragon and a starfighter. Like, you always need to know what the emotional beats are as well, because ultimately action is fun, but it gets real dull if you don't care about the characters. And so you want to make it a character story as much as anything, because like the reason people love Wolverine or Indiana Jones or, you know, Die Hard or whatever is it's not just because they're being badasses. It's because you can see what they're wrestling with internally. And that's what you fall in love with. And so I really tried to bring the same process to both. But I don't know, actually, you know, a lot of writing Dark Hearts was also fun just because it was during the pandemic, and so setting it in Seattle allowed me to take my characters to all the places that I wish I was going, you know. And so like, it's like they go to all my favorite restaurants, you know, and like they're going to concerts and stuff. It's like, God, that's all what I wish I was doing right now. And like, yeah, you know, you put a little bit of yourself into every character. Some characters more than others. Obviously, like I was never a international pop star, so like I can't write to that, but the main character I identify a ton with. And actually another thing that's sort of funny that people don't talk about very much, but like as a young adult writer, I find myself every time I'm reading young adult or watching like a young adult movie, I identify with the parents so much. You know, like the parents, which are supposed to be like the uncool dad or whatever, and I'm like, he's doing the best he can, like you cut him some slack.
I think that was one of our favorite things about Into the Spider-Verse. Right. Like the parents are just brilliant.
Yeah,
they're such stereotypical parents, but then they like, you can tell the, you know, conflict that they're dealing with and everybody else. So all of a sudden they become super identifiable, certainly to anyone over like 30.
I love that, right? So like it's, you always have to connect with who you were as a teenager in order to write teenagers, but the parents, you can just be like, this is just me, or like, this is just my friends. Like, okay, he's sitting around watching Stranger Things, like eating, chips off of his bare stomach. Like, yeah, that's okay. We can all identify with that.
That's
his back hurts in the morning.
Yeah, exactly.
I've rewatched Twilight a few times after being like a teenager, just because now it's like a fun, campy, cold, stupid movie.
Right.
You watch that now, and it's like Bella's dad is the only intelligent character in this entire. Like he's the only guy that's like, what's going on with this family? They're being really strange, and I don't like that you're hanging out with them. Yeah, no, you got the right radar there.
Well, it's funny. I really like a thing that I feel like I'm seeing more and more these days. Like I remember watching, I think it was Booksmart, and seeing that movie and thinking, every teenager character in here, even the villains, like by the end of the movie, they're not really villains. Like they're just other people. And I love that a lot. Like I always want to write characters where you sort of, even the bad guys, you see where they're coming from. And I think that's a chance to.
Edge of 17 did that fantastically.
Yeah. But that's also like, there's a chance to put yourself not just into the heroes, but into the villains as well, right? Like the best villains are always the ones that you kind of get why they're doing it, right? It's why we all love, and I keep coming back to, comics right now, because that's where my head's at, but like Magneto, right? Like you love Magneto because he's got a point, like he's not wrong.
Yeah, he's a great example. I always go to my favorite example of that is like Tywin Lannister. Personally, I think he's such a terrible person, but he's also like he's doing his job,
Yeah,
and like everybody comes to him when they all of a sudden everything fails, and they're like, "We need Tywin."
And he gets shit done.
This is a Tywin problem.
Game of Thrones was like that. Right? Like, I feel like that was the joy of Game of Thrones, was like, make me like characters that I start out hating. And then maybe I'll go back to hating them by the end. But the fact that you can humanize everybody enough, I think is really George Martin's gift. Like that and dialogue really just made those first couple of seasons sing.
Absolutely. And he does the reverse with the Starks throughout the series, which is just phenomenal, because you don't even see that coming. You don't even realize you don't like the Starks anymore until you're like, oh, I think the Starks are douchebags, actually.
Right. Kinda. That's why it can be really useful when you're writing a novel or a series to sort of outline for yourself where you're going. Now, I have no idea. Probably George doesn't outline that much, and that's probably why we'll never see the last book. But I think it's really useful to know where you're going to take a character, because then you can just be sort of like slowly dropping those breadcrumbs, and then hopefully make a change without everyone feeling like it was a sudden flip.
Right. I think we interviewed another author, I think this season and last season, S.K. Ira, who just made her first kind of step into fantasy, and her book was very much like that of warring cultures, and you get a view from, you get one character from each culture, and like you want to hate both, but then you're like, oh, well, I kind of get why those guys are fighting. I get why those guys, and it was very well done. But I like when that's even done on a grander scale, away from character, of like, I want to hate this whole society, but damn it, I can't when I like see it from their view is a really cool.
Well, that was always one of my gripes with I loved Star Wars. Like growing up, those were some of my favorite movies. I still love the Star Wars universe, but I feel like, especially with some of with the modern movies, I felt like they often missed a chance to really show us that the moral gray areas, and because it's so easy. For instance, I remember walking out of the theater and being super disappointed. I think it's in Force Awakens, where there's the bad guys are given a speech before they, use their super weapon. And it's basically just we are bad because we can. And I was just thinking, you could give the Game of Thrones writer's room 5 minutes, and they would come up with such compelling reasons that would make you go, oh shit, I see where these people are coming from. Right? It's one of because from the Empire's perspective, they're fighting terrorism. It's literally the war on terrorism. And all you have to do is swap out, like, you could take any speeches from like 2000s era, like American presidents, and just swap out the rebellion and Al Qaeda, and just like, put that speech in there, and suddenly, like, it would work because it's all the same justifications. So I think that, and I get that oftentimes people want a black and white narrative, and that has its place in that it can be really fun to not have to come home from a long day at work and be like, oh, I guess I have to consider the plight of the orcs that we're slaughtering. Like, I guess maybe I'm the bad guy. Right.
Sometimes it's nice to just slaughter orcs.
It is,
you know.
But ultimately, for me, like, I always am writing about sort of the moral quandaries, right? Like my second Pathfinder novel, The Redemption Engine, is all about the question of sort of like free will in good and evil, and the idea of like, if you have an alignment system that is codified, like in games, right? There's, for anybody who doesn't know, you often have that axis of like good and evil, lawful and chaotic, and the idea that some creatures just are good and some are bad. And that idea of, well, if you don't have a choice, if a devil doesn't choose to be evil, it just is evil, can you actually be evil if you didn't have any choice? Like, is that your fault? Right. And similarly, if you have a magic spell that can turn a bad person good, is that great because you've just reformed somebody? Or is that, I mean, horrible because it's non-consensual? You're like changing somebody's brain against their will. Like, is that itself a crime? You know, and so all those sorts of questions around what it means to have objective morality and the ability to change it were totally what drove that book for me, because I like playing with the moral gray shades.
Are you implying that every time I turn undead as a cleric, that I'm limiting the rights of the undead who have chosen to be undead and don't want to be turned, and now I have to have this philosophical quandary every time?
I think that might make for a real fun game.
Oh, yeah. Shame on you. Now I have to think about that.
I think too, the like line can be straddled on a morally gray character like arc and such without having. I think that's where I like to find the in between. I will find my thought, I swear, is like there can still be a right and wrong without it having to be like so cut and dry. Like orcs are bad, paladins are good. Like, I think there's a few authors I'm now starting to read that are like the choices, the individual choices that people make, that's where the gray is found. But once you look at the whole spectrum of things, it's like, no, but one of these sides is clearly right, but I do understand why the wrong is happening. Kind of.
Yeah, no, and that's how I feel too. Like, I'm not a pure moral relativist. I'm not going to be somebody that says like, well, there is no good and evil because it's just all personal perspectives and value sets. Like, I think it is valuable to understand where people are coming from, but I have no problem in fiction or in the real world with just occasionally saying like, okay, yes, I understand this is your culture. This is bad. Like, and I'm gonna fight against it. Right. Like, I think it is okay to call something out, and it's even okay to enforce your values on others through force. Like, I guess I don't believe in objective morality, because I think that ultimately, if there is no objective morality, you have to fight for what you believe is right. And I think that it's not wrong to try and stop what you see as evil in the world. Like, we may disagree, and at that point, you know, it may come to, you know, wars or whatever. But I think that's just how humanity progresses. Like, I don't think that you ever get a system where everybody's rights are totally protected, because then you're going to end up to protecting the right to abuse people too. And so anyway, I get very interested in all of this moral conundrum and trying to put that in books. There's actually not a lot of that in Dark Hearts, to be fair. Dark Hearts is mostly just about wrestling with your own personal shit.
Well, yeah, I think we connect with that moral stuff because we wrestle with it personally, and it's the thing we live with every day, and even if we don't notice it. So when we hit those characters, we're like, oh, why am I so in love with this character? Well, because...
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we are at about 50 minutes, so that's about all our time for the day. Yeah, that flew by, man. That was awesome.
Yeah, we went all over the place.
So James L. Sutter, can you tell us where people can find you? Tell us maybe a little bit about what to expect at your launch party. When are you releasing these Starfinder comics? When do you sleep? Tell us all these sorts of answers to all these awesome questions, so people can link up.
I'll sleep in July when all the launches are done. But until then, you can always find me. My website is jameslsutter.com. It's got all my stuff about my writing and music and whatnot there. You can find me on Twitter at James L. Sutter, or on Instagram. I'm there too. I think it's just like James_L_Sutter. But yeah, I'm always happy to chat with people. The book launch party, I'm having one in Seattle on June 6th. So come hang out. That'll be fun. It'll just be sort of a Q&A. I think I'm actually, this is a little bit of a divergence, but I think I'm actually going to play a song that they write in the book, because I thought that would be kind of a fun thing where it's like, oh, well, people don't know what this song sounds like the boys
Great
write
idea.
it in the book. So I'm gonna give that a shot. It'll be the first time I've played live in 3 years. But then there's going to be another party also in Bellingham at Village Books on the June 23rd. So you got your north and your south options.
Sweet.
But yeah, if people want to check out Dark Hearts, it'll be available wherever you get your books in whatever fashion. If you want to pre-order, that really helps people out. And by people, I mean me. It helps me out. But and then the comic, like we were saying, the first floppy comes out on in late June. But if you want to subscribe to or if you want to go back to Kickstarter that they're running right now, you can get the whole hardcover collection. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. But and then I've also got, if you want stuff for free, there's links on my website to, a bunch of short stories. If you like horror fiction, I've got a couple of those up there. So yeah, I think that's me.
James is really good at social media stuff, especially on Twitter. So
oh, thank you.
He's already released some teasers for the graphic novel, and they look fantastic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If you want to see what you're getting into, it's already on there.
Social media is so funny because I've had a number of random tweets go viral over the years, and you never know which dumb joke is going to be the thing that ends up everywhere. Last week, I posted something about bees and pollinators, and it was, within a week, it was oh, several million people have interacted with this. It's what?
What?
Why was this the thing today? But you just never know.
We're interviewing James L. Sutter today. He's written some novels. He also writes on pollinators.
Right.
Yes, viral bee tweets.
Tweets, man. Sometimes it'll be
top 10 pollinator expert.
That'll be the thing that gets people. I'll have friends that I haven't seen in 20 years be like, somebody in my garden club just posted about this tweet, or I've had some political ones over the years. One year, this was a weird high point. I had somebody ask if they could put one of my tweets about the 2016 election in a museum exhibit, because they were doing an exhibit on the election or electoral process, and they were like, we thought your weird tweet about the Lord of the Rings vis-a-vis the 2016 election was funny enough that we want to put it in this museum. And I went, that's maybe the most bizarre honor of my life. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Thank you so much, James, for coming on the show today. Everybody, thank you for listening. This has been James L. Sutter, our featured author of the month. Make sure to go check out his website. Check out the Kickstarter for Starfinder, and check out Dark Hearts. Go to the Seattle book launch party if you can. We'll have links to everything in the description. Again, thank you so much, James. It was an honor talking to you today, and I hope to chat with you again in the future.